Good afternoon, everybody, if you happen to be in Central or Eastern Canada, and good morning, everybody, if you happen to be in Western Canada. Welcome to this webinar. My name is Tom Clark. I'll be your moderator today. And I just want to say at the very beginning how delighted we are to be partnering not only with the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, but this is part of the Canadian Business Resilience Network, which, if you haven't been there or used it, it is a terrific resource. So I encourage you to do it. A little bit about me, just so you have some idea, and a little bit about what we're going to talk about. First of all, I'm kind of used to looking at a camera and talking. I did it for 45 years, working both as a political journalist in Canada, as a foreign correspondent. I was a war correspondent, 8 active war zones, 9 if you include Ottawa, which I regularly do. And I am now the chair of Global Public Affairs, and Global Public Affairs is delighted, obviously, to not only support the Canadian Chamber, not only to support the Canadian Resilience Network, but also just to be among you, and thank you all very much for joining us today. So that's about me. Let's get into the substance of what we're going to talk about. And it isn't so much a question of the usual talk about tech. This is about the acceleration of tech. Here's how I look at it. Something happened in March of 2020, and that thing was that we brought 2030 into 2020. In other words, everything that we thought would happen in the next 10 years is actually happening right now. And so the big question is, how are we as companies adapting to that? But also, more importantly, how are governments in this country reacting to that? Are they being helpful, or are they getting in the way? Are they giving the right support? How is public policy intersecting with all of this? And also, the other big question is, you know, we used to say, well, I'm not really a tech company. I make wooden cabinets. Well, there's hardly a company in Canada today, and I can't even think of one, quite frankly, that isn't somehow a tech company. We have crossed that line. Some, of course, more than others, but everybody's got digital assets. And as owners of digital assets, we have a stake in how this progresses and how this acceleration of technology is shaping our world and shaping the climate in which we do business. Interestingly enough, I would say that the government itself is a tech company. It just doesn't know it yet. And like a lot of startup tech companies, it's having a few problems with user experience, but that's endemic to governments throughout history, perhaps. So we're going to be talking about how we intersect public policy-wise and from a company position in this newly accelerated world. We're also going to take a look at the future of work. Of course, we've all heard of companies that are now saying they're digital by default, which simply means the office is gone or largely gone. It means that employees can work wherever they want. The whole concept of how we interact together is going to reshape not only our businesses, but it's going to reshape our cities. It's going to reshape perhaps our rural areas. We're going to talk about that. And finally, one of the other things that'll be on the table is, from my end anyway, is going to be the whole question of how do we continue to attract or try and attract the best and the brightest from around the world if, in fact, it doesn't matter where you live anymore. Such is the revolution that we are living through, or the acceleration that we are living through. Those are the things I want to talk about, but this webinar has to be about what you want, your interests, your concerns, your questions. And so I really encourage you to go to the chat bar at the bottom and give us your thoughts, give us your questions. And yeah, we'll have a period at the end where we'll deal with that exclusively. But even as we're going on, I'm going to be looking at what you are sending us, and I will be incorporating that into our discussion. It's going to be relatively informal. We're not having large, big opening statements. We're going to get right to the issues. As soon as I stop talking, we're going to get right to the issues. So let me introduce you to the actually important people here on this webinar. Let me start with my colleague, Nicole Broussard, who is in Vancouver. She is a senior consultant with Global Public Affairs, and she is our key lead in our practice, our tech and government relations practice. Nicole, welcome. Razor Suleiman is joining us from Toronto. Razor, you may know. If you don't know Razor, you know what he does, and that is that he is the CEO of this country's largest and arguably most important tech gathering, and it's called Elevate, and it is the must place to be, if that's an expression. But anyway, it's an important thing. Razor, good to have you here. And finally, an old friend of mine and an old friend of everybody here is my friend Perrin Beatty. Needs no introduction, but I'll give him a little one anyway. I think, Perrin, you and I have known each other since we were teenagers. And
the emphasis on old.
Anyway, as the CEO of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce is an integral part to the discussion that we're having today, and an integral part of the discussions in general in business in this country. So I welcome you all. Let's get right to the question. And Perrin, I'm going to start with you in your position as the CEO of the Chamber. I'm tempted to say, what keeps you up at night other than the $350 billion deficit that we have? Are you walking into this in an optimistic mood? Where are you on that scale?
I'm apprehensive. We're looking at $1.2 trillion worth of debt, and the government really has four choices in terms of dealing with that. It can try to inflate its way out of it. That's a real problem. It causes all sorts of other difficulties. It can take the decision that interest rates are low, so we'll simply ignore it for the time being. Interest rates won't always be low. It can decide to send a bill to our kids, or it can focus on private sector growth. And the responsible approach is to grow the private sector. The question is how to do that, and every country in the world is going to be looking at how to do that, how to improve their market share, and that's certainly where tech comes in at this point.
Let me go to Razor on perhaps one of the key issues in the landscape as we discuss this, and that is, who actually is a tech company? I said at the beginning, my own view was virtually everybody is a tech company these days, but you're the guy who actually knows. So let me put it to you. Are you seeing more companies, more traditional companies perhaps, that would never have considered going to Elevate in the past, now self-identifying, sort of, if you want, coming out of the tech closet and declaring themselves to be a tech company? Are you seeing that? Well, hang on a second there. Wouldn't you know, our tech expert muted himself. Anyway, nope. There we go. Go ahead.
Thank you. Yes. Listen, we're seeing everybody reposition themselves as a tech company. About 15 years ago, Mark Andreessen said, famously, software is eating the world. And I don't think people fully appreciated it, but if you take this moment within COVID, there are clearly the haves and have-nots. Those organizations that rely on bits and technology and software to be able to deliver their product or service, I would define as a tech company. Those that had to rely on people for the most part for delivery, or atoms, they made stuff, I think really struggled over these last 4 months, where they've seen their market caps go down. And look at, if you just take the S&P, right, it's about even this year. And you're like, how is it possible that in the greatest economic recession in 100 years that we're even? But it's not true, right? Like, of the S&P 500, 490 companies transferred all of the wealth to 10 companies that are all tech companies. So we have an imperative. We need to double down on accelerating the digital transformation of those companies that want to make the journey to tech companies, of starting more tech companies, of exporting Canadian technology to the world.
This leads me to a question to my friend Nicole. We're talking, Perrin talked about it, Razor talked about it a little bit, the whole idea of how you not only engage, but how you grow, how you help people adapt. And so in the area of government in particular, let me put on my old journalist hat here and say, let's follow the money and see where it takes us. So follow the money for us. As of right now, our governments, and largely federal, but also provincial in many cases, where are they putting the money? Is it the right place to help the industry? Give us some idea of where that is right now.
Yeah, I think it's not just about prioritizing tech for government. I think it's about prioritizing kind of the user experience and how Canadians access the services and programs that we provide. We've seen that really accelerated throughout COVID right now. Government's been, to my surprise, very nimble and very quick at rolling out some programs and services to support Canadians right now. And I think that's where they're putting their dollars. There's been a general shift over maybe the last 5 years about really doubling down. We've got our first Minister of Digital Government, and Joyce Murray, who's from BC, so I'll give her a shout out. I'm a little bit biased. And a really strong minister in Navdeep Bains in ISAD. So we've got, I think, the people in place, and I think the will is there, and some great government programs like SIF, the Strategic Innovation Fund, that's doling out some money. But I think it's really a focus of putting the dollars towards companies and innovation and solutions that are really going to make the lives of Canadians better right now.
Let me pick up on something you just said and throw it to all three of you. But it's simply this, you know, the governments of all stripes tell us that they're making transformative investments in the tech sector. There's a word that, you know, is in the word cloud, would be huge. So I question whether it's transformative, but for anybody who has had to take or decided to take money from government, they know the cost is enormous. It is endless paperwork, endless justification, and endless delays on virtually everything. So when you get a transformation and acceleration like we're going through right now, what are your thoughts on, you know, governments which are not known to be nimble and are heavily weighted towards so-called accountability? Are they more of a problem than they are a solution? I throw it out to either Perrin or Razor to start. Perrin, go ahead.
Okay, let me take a stab at it. During the pandemic, governments have moved at what for government is warp speed. But for the private sector, it's been a source of frustration in that governments have had a very hard time keeping up to the evolving circumstance. The private sector has been much more supple, has moved much more quickly. The most important thing that the government can do is to get the climate right and the environment, and to get the precursors of success right. We have to look at skills. Do we have a workforce that is well trained and adaptable and able to deal with it? Do we have an investment climate in Canada that encourages investment? Do we have a regulatory light hand? You mentioned that if you're taking a direct subsidy from the government, there's all sorts that goes with it, the delay, the paperwork, and so on. It's also the camel's nose coming into the tent, and the whole camel is apt to be there in terms of approving or disapproving of what you're doing. It makes it very difficult in a very fast-moving free enterprise economy for business to be able to function. So the key is to recognize what government's appropriate role is, for it to confine itself to that, do it well, and then step back and let the private sector fill the void.
Razor, weigh in on this.
Yeah, listen to me. I will give our government, I'm not usually a big fan, but I'm very impressed with how quickly they moved. You know, if there was an axis on speed versus accuracy in doling out a record amount of money, they clearly opted for speed, which I think we do appreciate given the sensitivity and the urgency of the matter. Did they get it completely right? No, but they're also, like us, working from home, right? Navdeep Bains is in his living room, so is Minister Morneau, and they're trying to figure out, right, how to best serve Canadians everywhere. And I think they've been good in getting that first pile of money out, fine-tuning programs. I know we've had the privilege of hosting them on conversations like this and getting direct stakeholder feedback. So I do got to give credit. While I do think they've taken a nice broad approach in stabilization funding, you know, things like rent or the wage subsidy and CERB clearly has helped most Canadians. I think as they think about the recovery money and returning the economy back to the trajectory we have, I think they now need to start to take an industry by industry sector approach, because they haven't really doled out programs specifically for tech. And some of them, you know, if you're a tech company, if you're an early stage tech company, let's say you're at $3 million in revenue growing 100% year over year, you might be flat. For a tech company, that's death. And you may not have, you know, you may not have shrunk by 30% to qualify for the wage subsidy. So while flat is a bad outcome for a tech company, it's still not qualified under the government. So I do think there is some nuance and some fine tuning that I hope the next batch of those dollars will focus specifically on some of the challenges within the tech sector.
Okay, so if I read Perrin and Razor correctly, what you're saying is that they're from the government and they're here to help, which is always a dangerous thing to think about, but fair enough. But Nicole, let me go to you on this, that if in fact there is a good justification for government doing more than just getting out of the way, that in fact they should be investing, they should be putting money into startups or mid-career companies. What is the sort of thing that government is responding to now? What are the sort of things that they want to hear? I'm talking about outside the CERB program and the temporary stuff that we've got, but in terms of engaging the government on public policy issues, on everything from, not only growing your own company, but perhaps supplying the government. As I said, the government is a tech company, it just doesn't know it yet. So what is government responding to? What do they want to hear?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is really, what we like to frame it for government is like providing them a bit of a narrative about what the problem is, identifying for them what the problem is, and then coming to them with that solution. I don't think government's looking for enterprise-wide solutions to some of their problems. We've seen how badly that went with the Phoenix Pay system. That was enterprise-wide implementation. It's going to take a long time to kind of unwind that and fix that. And so I think government's wanting to see more iterative and kind of piecemeal solutions along the process to provide that value. And if you can find that problem and that solution and work to roll that out with maybe a specific ministry or a specific department, I think that's kind of where they would be most interested in having that conversation.
Perrin, I just want to steer this to you because I think we're maybe blurring the lines between what is a pure tech company and what are companies that use tech. We know that pure tech companies are not great generators of jobs. In fact, the outcome of a really successful tech company is that you get rid of people because you don't need people. Well, there won't be any offices anymore, but you know what I mean. When it comes to, and let's stick strictly at the moment with the idea of growing the tech industry, because as you know, as everybody knows, there are so-called designated tech hubs almost everywhere in Canada. Obviously the Waterloo region, but also Ottawa and Toronto and Montreal for AI, and Alberta is desperately trying to grow some sort of a tech industry. When you're an industry that does not create the same number of jobs as the old style industries do, Perrin, you were a cabinet minister. People came to you all the time asking for money and handouts and help and all that sort of thing. How do you square that circle of, why would I give you money when you're not going to be creating a whole lot of jobs, which is exactly what we need right now?
Because the product you create is absolutely critical to the whole rest of the economy and to our competitiveness. As you were mentioning earlier, everybody is a tech company these days, or else they're in trouble. And tech companies are facilitators for the growth and competitiveness of our economy across the board. Look at the supermarket sector. Now, increasingly, we're seeing the way retail is changing to click and collect. People are transforming their business models. And we're seeing this in so many different areas. You need the technology to be able to do that. Tom, as someone who's interested in public policy and public affairs, you will have followed very closely, as I did, the debate that there was over cell phone rates. Earlier this year, going back to the speech from the throne last year, and then earlier this year, the government's priority was how do we bring down the cost to individual consumers of cell phone rates? What we discovered as a result of COVID is that our telecom system is absolutely crucial to the very functioning of our society. And when the telcos made the argument, they needed the money to invest into going to 5G and rolling out services into lower served areas, rural and remote areas, for example. The government rejected that in favor of saying, let's bring rates down. I think if we had the same debate today, it would take place in a very different way with people saying, this is critical to the very survival of our economy and our ability to compete, that we have a robust telecom system and that it be extended throughout the country. So COVID-19 in particular is accelerating trends, and they're forcing us to reinvent models, and it's putting tech at the heart of everything that every business is doing.
Razor, weigh in on this. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, listen, I think job creation is something that we all want to hear, right? We all want to see our young people get meaningful jobs. We all want to see our nation fully employed. But as you mentioned, tech might think of it as a different perspective. Let's talk about our number one and number two most valuable companies in the country. You've got Shopify in the worst economic environment, just past RBC and all of the banks at about $150 billion. And you have RBC at number two at $135 billion, right? Shopify more than doubled in the worst economic environment. And they employ less than 10% of what RBC employs. And so we need to start thinking about what are the metrics that matter, and clearly job creation does matter. But if we could create more high quality jobs that automate or maybe eliminate some of the low value jobs in our sector, if we can create enough wealth in our country to maybe offer things like universal basic income, I know we're experimenting it with CERB, we may have to just redefine our definition of success beyond job creation, because if tech does win, by definition, they've taken out all of or most of the people, at least, the jobs that can be automated. And so I think we need to redefine what success is in this country. Because again, if Shopify then empowers 1 million people to start home businesses, to become entrepreneurs, and maybe get off unemployment, maybe not take a teller job at RBC, but start their own home business, isn't that a success, but in a different way? So I do challenge the government. While I'm all for job creation, I think we need to continue to feed the tech sector. There are over 200,000 jobs open that are unfilled in the tech sector. A number of them in things like machine learning and quantum computing and cybersecurity, things that even university students going into school today aren't going to be trained and qualified for the jobs we're going to need today, let alone 5 years from now. So I think we really need to think about how do we feed the tech companies in our country so they can continue to grow and create value, and then how do we define other success metrics that can, to demonstrate the prosperity of our country.
What occurs to me is that our country was effectively created through a massive infrastructure project known as the Canadian Pacific Railway. That really helped create what we now know as Canada. It seems to me that we're probably on the verge of having to do another major, huge project in Canada, and that is building the digital highway. What's become very clear to everybody, no matter what business you're in, is that since March 15th or 16th, whatever that horrible date was when we all entered this new weird world, the strength, reliability, and the availability of good quality broadband has suddenly become one of the most central things to our lives. And so building the new national railway, call it a digital railway, is probably in our interest. And Nicole, back to you on that. Are you getting the sense from government at all levels? And I want to, in a minute, go to the differentiation between federal response, provincial response, and even municipal response, because that's a big one as well. But are you getting the sense that government is actually fully aware of the necessity of, or fully appreciative rather, of this inflection point in history where we find ourselves sitting right now?
Yeah, I think so. When we're talking about how tech can deliver services for Canadians best, there's obviously a very large gap in the rural areas of Canada. We're obviously a huge, vast country with a lot of pockets not in the urban centers that don't have access to walk down the street to a Service Canada and can't log online to access some of the programs that they need. And so I think government, particularly the rural MPs, are really hearing from their constituents that this is something that we need to accelerate. That 2030 timeline is no longer viable right now. It needs to be moved up, and it needs to happen now. I think that's definitely top of mind for them. And it also comes to kind of upskilling and retraining our workforce too. There's a lot of change right now in what our workforce looks like. Some of the natural resource sectors are going to be transitioning into different types of jobs. And as Razor said, there needs to be a focus on that upskilling and really ensuring that we're getting university programs accredited fast, and so that we can get people into those pipelines so that when maybe other industries are waiting and we're seeing a growth in the tech industry, there's opportunity for those people to upskill and change their career path.
To all of you, because we're talking about the inevitable, and that is the further growth and the acceleration of technology. What specific tech projects either the government can support or that companies should be investing in would do the most for this country right now? And I'm thinking of especially in rural and remote areas where unemployment or a purpose is missing right now. Surely the fastest moving industry, technology, should be having a say in that. So what is it? What should we be doing? And that actually is a question that was posed on Slido, which I will tell everybody, please keep on sending in your comments, because we're going to now include all of your thoughts in the conversation. Perrin, do you want to pick that up?
Well, the rollout of 5G and the extension of services, pardon me, into rural and remote areas. In January, I attended the Calgary Chamber of Commerce, had a national summit on agriculture. It was pretty interesting being there and listening to a woman who was a rancher just outside of Calgary, and she talked about the investment she had in her tractor in computerization and the inability that she had to use the equipment she had because she didn't have access to the broadband that she needed to be able to do it. What we found as a result of COVID is that telemedicine has been accelerated dramatically. We've discovered that working from home, that distributed workforces are not only viable but desirable. All of this requires, though, that you have the technological infrastructure in place. And to draw the parallel to the CPR, the importance of the CPR over all these years hasn't been the direct jobs in the CPR. It's been the CPR as a facilitator. The same applies to 5G and to broadband more broadly. It is democratic to roll it out to rural areas. It will allow us to provide services that never could have been provided before, and it'll create the ability of Canadian businesses to compete globally.
Mm-hmm. And I think that, and Suleiman, correct me, or Razor, correct me if I'm wrong, but we are just on the verge of Elon Musk perhaps providing this through his low Earth orbit set of satellites. I think Telesat is trying to do the same thing, the spider webs coming from outer space, which presumably would almost correct the problem overnight, right? I mean, as soon as you turn on that box, no matter where you are in the world, you've got super fast internet.
That's true, and we are all rooting for Elon to hopefully accomplish that. Another good example of a tech company, you wouldn't consider a car manufacturer a tech company. And just this past month, Elon Musk and Tesla became the most valuable car company worth $250 billion, passing Toyota, even though Toyota makes 50 times more cars than Tesla does, right? So how do we create more Teslas in Canada? I want to go back to your previous question around the railway being the first sort of government stimulus project. And while Elon and others may solve the internet connectivity, which is clearly something that, to me, internet should be a public service. It should be a utility that's equally accessible to every Canadian across the country. But imagine we took that bet on 5G and we applied the technology to solve a problem, which is what I'm passionate about. I think if you look back to other times in history where governments have galvanized a country at a time of crisis, I think of JFK and what he did in 1961 to the joint sessions of Congress when he said, by the end of this decade, we will send a man to the moon and return him home safely. It was very clear, it was very inspiring, it was very concise in terms of a time frame. Imagine when you think about what the world is going to experience in the next few years, we are going to experience another 100-year, once in a 100-year event. And hopefully it's not another pandemic, but it will be the transition from, if you think about it, from 1907, from the horse and buggy to the horseless carriage that Henry Ford brought to the world in about 1907, right? 80%, 90% of the world use horses as the primary force of transportation, and then gas-powered cars. We're going to see that same revolution happen in the next few years. Imagine if Justin Trudeau were to say, hey, by the end of the next year, or 2022, we will take a truck from St. John, Newfoundland, and drive him down, or drive them, or it down the Highway 1, the Trans-Canada Highway, and pick up cargo in Vancouver and return it back to a manufacturer, let's say in St. John's, completely autonomously, right? That's what we need to achieve. You need to have 5G everywhere. You need to have sensors built into the road. You need to change provincial regulations across the country. But imagine how inspiring that would be if Canada were truly the first autonomous country, and that we powered that next once in 100 years event. It's not going to happen again in our lifetime. And why that particular event is so powerful is that the number one job in every province across this country is truck driver. It's truck driver. It's one of the last few remaining jobs where a high school graduate can earn 6 figures and support their family across the country, rural Canada, and that job will not exist within 5 years. It's not cars that are going to get replaced first, it's trucks, because you rather have cargo going down at 120 miles an hour in rural Canada than your loved ones. Just think about the sequence of how this is going to happen. Why can't Canada, who has the largest patch of land and the largest, longest highway in the world, demonstrate leadership? Isn't that the next moonshot? Why aren't we working at trying to get something that, again, inspires Canadians and truly advances our country and brings 2030 into the present?
Oh, okay, but over to you, Nicole. We also have, as Perrin has pointed out, a debt approaching $1.3 trillion. When you're talking about moonshots, when you're talking about massive new infrastructure programs, where's the money going to come from?
That's fair. I'm getting excited listening to Razor speak here, just because this is the stuff that I get excited about too, like making Canadian the first to do these type of things. And I think when we're looking at where the money's coming from, I think it's about investment and kind of this new exciting wave in our economy right now, and leveraging quantum, blockchain, AI, all these really innovative and exciting new solutions to drive this economy and create new industry as others are kind of collapsing. So I'm a millennial, I'll put my hand up and say I'm okay with debt. So any kind of government debt doesn't bother me right now, but other generations might have different opinions. But I think by focusing on the technology sector and the industries that are growing right now, I think that's really our best bet.
I wanted to get to a question, and Mike, forgive me if I have mispronounced your last name, Zambakidis, I think it is. But Mike sort of weighs in on this, and he's asking about, the best ways of creating, if you're in the clean tech industry, for example, what specifically can you do? I mean, we're talking, and I think quite rightly so, about the big picture, the 30,000-foot look at what is possible and what we can do and how we can get out of it. But there are a lot of people who are just sitting saying, okay, that's great, but in the next day, what am I supposed to be doing to advance my particular cause and my particular company? Does anybody want to, Nicole, maybe it's back to you. I mean, is that a pure government play? I mean, let's put you as Mike's counselor at this point, and what would you say? What is the best route if you're in a clean tech play? What do you do?
Yeah, the government and all industries and all Canadians should be so focused on putting the word green before everything that they're doing, whether that's trucking and kind of moving to different types of fossil fuels, whether that's the airline industry. Everybody's looking at different ways that they can green their operations. And tech certainly plays into that. It's a bit of a complicated question based on what you were specifically doing, but I think you're really going to find favor with government overall, whether you've got a tech company, but particularly if you can prove how it reduces GHGs and how it can take cars and trucks off the roads or ships out of the ocean. Really highlighting that for government, I think, is a really great way to find favor with them, get support, and also build a really good CSR for your company.
Perrin, I want to check in on you because when Nicole said she doesn't care about the size of debt, I just wanted to make sure your heart was still operating and that you were still with us. But
I'm with Nicole, by the way. I'm just keep spending, keep printing money. I'm fine with that.
Okay, deep breaths, Perrin, deep breaths.
I'm counting on you to write the check, Tom.
I want to sort of veer off a little bit, and we're going to keep on talking about the concerns that are being put on Slido and through our chat bar. But I want to sort of shift us into an area that actually is a concern for everybody, no matter how big or how small you are, and that is the future of work. What we've gone through, what we're going through, what some companies have already decided, and others are sort of still thinking about it. Do we need offices? What's that going to do to our cities? What's it going to do to downtown real estate? The way we recruit, the way we interact, the way that companies grow, company culture. I'm throwing all this stuff on the table, but it really comes down, to a major question, and that is if you can work from literally anywhere in the world. You don't have to be in downtown Vancouver. You don't have to be in downtown Toronto or any of the suburbs where you're fighting traffic for 8 hours a day or whatever it is to get in. What does that do to our role, our Canadian role, as a leader in technology that we want to be, when maybe some of our best assets are going to be living in Brazil? Razor, I'll go with you.
Yeah, listen, if you think about technology and the big technology trends over the last 30 years, right? We had personal computers, we had the rise of the internet, we had mobile technology. I think COVID is going to be more disruptive than all three combined. I think this is just the beginning, right? We're just seeing the beginning parts of how the world is going to change, unlike any other moment. And I think that if I am a real estate investor, I am shorting commercial real estate because I do think getting to this 22nd floor of First Canadian Place, is going to be problematic. And I'm long on residential because this work from home. I don't know if a dink double income, no kids can survive in a 600 square foot King West apartment when they may have grown up in Barrie. I actually think this could be a boon for the rural communities across Canada. Again, so long as they have qualified talent, so long as they've got access to great internet, as we've discussed. But to your point, where does it end? Because if I can outsource that job to Barrie, Ontario, why not Bangalore, India? Why stop there? Because there's so many cost advantages of completely leaving the country. So I think we need to be really careful about our policies. I think we really need to be thoughtful around what the market is going to do when it has a whole new post-COVID world in which it can source talent. I think it's going to be a really interesting time, right? We've seen so many tech companies already. You saw Shopify, Toby sent the tweet that changed the world with the end of office centricity. I happen to live in a condo in King West, and to the right of me is a giant Shopify tower under construction, and to the left of me is a giant Shopify tower under construction, right? Well, what happens to all of that real estate, right? Jack Dorsey said, you can work from anywhere, anytime, forever. And then you had a bunch of companies follow. You had the Bank of Montreal, a 160-year-old financial institution, say that 30 to 80% of their employees will never go back to a BMO desk. Like, where does this end? So I think we're going to see such huge changes. I think people are just watching to see what happens. And it'll be interesting in 2021 with the potential second wave of COVID, right? I know we're all feeling good. Wave 3 is coming. We get to eat outside. But if you follow every pandemic in the history of the world, and while the data isn't great, the last pandemic of 100 years ago, the first wave followed very much like COVID did, right? It's kind of going through, they use social distancing and quarantining. It's all 100-year-old technology. But it wasn't until the fall, when they thought it was all clear, kind of how we're feeling now, did the second wave come, and it was 5 times more deadly. I think we're in the second inning of COVID, and I think that when it continues to rage, as we're seeing in the southern United States, as we're seeing in the third world, I think that this work from home is a permanent fixture, and the longer we grow roots in that little den we had, the more likely is that we're going to stay there and we're not going back. Because let's be honest, gentlemen, the people that generally have the power in our country, okay, often look like the two of you. And they have wonderful McMansions in Oakville and beach houses in Vancouver. And they have COVID-filled office towers that they're kind of like, you know what? I don't know if I want to leave right now and rush back. And if those senior executives don't come back to the office, right, do you think the rest of the team are going to be running back there? So I think it's going to be wildly transformative that we have not even seen the beginning of.
Well, you know, Nicole, it's not often you're referred to as one of the guys, and one of the, I was thinking about you during that. But Perrin, I want to get to you, Nicole, in a second, but Perrin, I wanted to ask you, because this sort of begins to hit at the core of a public policy issue for Canada, and certainly for the Chamber, but also just in terms of public policy in general, that when you have this sort of democratization of the workforce, when you have the dissemination of the workforce to wherever the heck you want to go, and so on, how does something like the Chamber react to that? How do we continue to create a national policy, a national environment, which some would argue we don't have now anyway, because it is very spread out between provinces, and the approaches are not the same. But nevertheless, let's pretend there's a big national policy on this. This thing that Razor was just talking about, how substantially does that change the landscape for governments, for chambers of commerce? I mean, are you seeing it the same way?
Yeah, it's a massive game changer. And Razor's absolutely right about how transformative this is, but we're still at the very early stages. We're glimpsing just shadows in front of us of a sense of where all of this is going, but already we're seeing the impact. Talk to people in the real estate sector, and they'll tell you that sales in cottage country have gone up through the roof, with people saying, this is it, I want to relocate, I'm capable of doing that now, and I want to choose my lifestyle. Don't want to be in an urban area. The impact in urban architecture, for example, is going to be profound. But every institution is going to be rethinking how it's organized and structured, what its workforce is. It creates enormous opportunities, very democratic in a sense that it creates opportunities for people who couldn't participate fully before. People in rural and remote areas suddenly can get a job where the job was in downtown Toronto before, or in New York, or in Tokyo, wherever. It means that persons with disabilities can participate more fully, or that seniors can, if the people organizing our institutions are creative in terms of how they structure it. It also means that competition, that your competition for your job in Grimsby could be coming from Melbourne, Australia. And it means then that we have got to benchmark ourselves against the best of the world. We've got to be far more flexible than we've been. We have to look at education and retraining as something that is a lifetime process where we're constantly upgrading our skills. And the Canadian business community and governments have to be much more expansive in our view as to what our market is and how we operate. We tend still to think in terms of competing locally. Our market now is global. Our competitors are global. Our customers are global. Our suppliers are global. And it means that we've got to change our thinking. And we've also, Tom, got to get away from shooting for the bronze. It's a Canadian characteristic that we think that it's impolite if we want to be number one in the world. Shopify missed that class at Biz School. Mm-hmm. And they're determined they're going to go to number one. It doesn't offend me if Shopify is hiring somebody in Brazil or in Bangalore that makes that company headquartered in Ottawa more successful. That doesn't offend me at all. It creates jobs for Canadians at the same time and creates the wealth that Razor was talking about earlier that's so important for this country. But we have to reconceive the way in which we look at doing business and Canada's role in the world.
So, Nicole, this comes to to your neck of the woods now, and that is how governments are reacting to the very things that both Razor and Perrin have been talking about, that when you're reimagining how the world works and trying to then update what your national policy is, how, where are you now in terms of saying, our job is to attract the best and the brightest to move to Canada. Whereas in fact, the best and the brightest may be saying, I'll work for you, but I'm not going to live there, especially in February when it's minus 500 degrees. So, I want to talk a little bit about the role of government, and let me put it into a context, a real life context. And this goes well beyond in the past. Before COVID, before Shopify, before any of this, there was a little newspaper in Southern California, and it covered the local town council. It was typical small town newspaper. It had no employees. They contracted all their work out to India. Because of the internet, somebody in, I don't know where it was, Mumbai or Bangalore or Delhi, could sit in front of their computer, watch the town council, take notes, and then on voice over internet protocol, give the councillor a call and do an interview. Write a story, press send, it goes to the newspaper in California. Bingo, the whole news cycle was done from India. And it was very comprehensive. And that happened 20 years ago. So in many respects, everything old is new again, but here we are. So that little diversion of a story, but let me bring it back to the government issue and the thing that you spend your days worrying about.
And also props to that city council in Southern California, because I've been watching city council here in Canada and they are struggling to do it online. So if that city council in California could do it 20 years ago, that's setting the bar high for here in Vancouver.
Well, I mean, it does bring up a public policy issue, though, that if your news about your local town is coming from India, this is, you got to sort of wrap your head around that a little bit, because we've never seen that before. But on those issues, such as, how do you preserve journalism, native journalism, as opposed to letting it come to you from some other place in the world, but also all sorts of other issues, dealing with smaller companies struggling in this new global environment, trying to figure out, there's only one Shopify as far as I know in Canada. Hopefully there'll be 2 or 3 more soon. But in the meantime, most are SMEs. And as an SME dealing with government, how does that conversation go? I mean, the walls are crumbling, the streets are drying up, metaphorically from what we understood before. Walk me through that a little bit. Where does the public discussion on this go?
Yeah, I think we're dealing with legacy legislation, legacy systems, and oftentimes legacy people that have been in government for a very long time and are a little bit stuck in terms of reimagining how this could work. Government only has a couple sticks that they can use when they want to put some restrictions around SMEs. But I think there's certainly a policy area here that we talked about before when it comes to kind of regulating industry and maybe mandating how many full-time employees are Canadian residents or Canadian citizens. I think that there's very few ways that government can really get around to mandating that. One of them is through money that they give. We talked about the strings that are attached to government funds, and that is definitely a big one. And we've already seen that rolled out through the Strategic Innovation Fund. That's already a criteria to get that money in the door. So it'll be interesting to see how government moves on this, and if their policy can really catch up to keep these jobs in Canada, or where they're going to find some flexibility. I think to your question, the public conversation on this, we're moving, because of COVID, it seems to be a little bit more of a protectionist kind of country. Certainly here in BC, we're focusing on keeping jobs local, keeping manufacturing local. We've got what we call made in BC solution here, and maybe that's a made in Canada solution that we're focusing on too when we're starting to develop that policy.
Perrin, let me throw it over to you. And this question comes from Anonymous because that's how he identifies himself or herself, I must say. Interesting question, though, and that is that when one of the guiding or major political parties in this country has as its North Star, its guiding light, the idea of austerity and bringing budgets into balance, inevitably what you're talking about, if you're not raising more revenue, you're cutting more services, and we've got quite a hole that we're in now, and yet there seems to be an agreement that now is the time actually to be spending to get into this new environment, whether it be building the 5G network remotely and bringing everybody into it. So how do you, and I'm asking you to put on your old political hat here a little bit, but also from the position of where you sit right now, how do you reconcile those two imperatives? And what's going to happen there?
The answer is you reconcile it through growth. Tom, you can't cut your way back to balance with a deficit the size of the one that we have today. It's just impossible to do. So what we have to do is we have to focus on how we encourage growth. It's important to understand that it's the private sector, not government, that creates wealth. What government can do, though, is to create the conditions in which the private sector can flourish. It does mean that governments at all levels are going to have to revisit the pre-COVID public policy agenda and differentiate between the nice-to-haves that perhaps we could have afforded in January and the must-haves that are critical for us to be able to make the investments that are necessary, or even to afford the continuing supports that are going to be necessary to keep businesses and families afloat until the economy starts to grow again. But the critical element, the one option that is workable for dealing with this is growth. That growth has to come from the private sector. And it means then that at the public policy level, we need to revisit the agenda.
Razor, could I ask you then that if as Perrin says, there's, you can walk and chew gum at the same time economically. If you could identify the single most important pocket of government help for a company that is beginning or is in midstream, what would that be?
Okay, I have two, but I'll answer your question as single because there's one obvious one. Customers. Tech companies need revenue. While government handouts are nice to have, we need to create a culture of supporting our own. Nicole talked about a buy from BC or buy from Canada. Like, we don't have that mindset in Canada. Israel, a country of 7 million people, has exported so many great global tech companies because their big companies, corporate Canada in this example, should have a social obligation to buy from the startup community, right? Because every big company was once a small company. And if we don't buy from our own because it's 10 cents cheaper to buy from China, we end up in a situation like we had with PPE. And so to me, there's a no-brainer. And I don't want to get all protectionism. I understand that trade creates wealth. And I'm not proposing buy Canadian or buy made in Canada. I want to promote the made by Canadians, right? So that our software, which can be exported all over the world, but supported by our own companies, is what we need. And I'm going to give you an example. It's an embarrassing example for Canada, but there was an incredible entrepreneur in a company actually we're in a host from called D-Wave. D-Wave created the first quantum computer, right? They sold one to Google, they sold one to Facebook, they sold one to NASA. Guess how many quantum computers that we built in Canada were sold across this great land of ours? Guess how many? Yeah, zero. Like, why not? Just for the hell of it, to be like, first quantum computer, we need to have it. We need to do, whatever quantum computing does, even if we don't know what it means. But if we want to be a tech company, the Canadian government, we're going to have the most powerful company, and we're going to tell the whole world about it, how it's changing everything. And we're going to send our Prime Minister or Minister Ng on doing a roadshow to every other government of why they need a quantum computer made by D-Wave. Why didn't that happen? Why are we promoting Google's Nest when we have, Stuart Lombard's Ecobee, right? It's better, faster, and cheaper made right here. Yet we're not aware of all the amazing technology that we build because we don't support our own. And so that would be my ask. That would be my number one ask. My number two ask, sorry to this, is talent. You know, as you talked about, Perrin, we need to create the environment in which companies can grow. There are so many open tech jobs in this country. We need to reach out beyond the usual suspects. We need to empower women to continue to get promoted. If you look at the top of most boards, most tech companies, it's a very homogeneous demographic, right? We have so many talented women across this country sitting on the sidelines. Like, what an untapped resource. Then we've got the BIPOC community, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, right? Wildly talented. 50% of US unicorns, right? The billion-dollar companies were founded by immigrants, by people from the BIPOC community. And yet we don't fully embrace that. And I know it's getting a lot of attention now, much deserved, but just those two pockets of talent that are just generally not in that walled garden, we need to figure out, create systems we're a country of 36 million people. We can't afford to leave anybody on the sideline, right? We need to figure out, how do we leverage every Canadian and assess them on their talent and not their gender identity or their sexual orientation or their ability or their race, right? So we need to be the leader in doing that as a country. That's really how Canada was built. It's in our DNA, right? We're the best recruiters of immigrants. We've got this fast-track visa programs, and we do a great job of integrating them into the country, right? Now let's put them to work and get them to grow and take meaningful roles and create value for all of us.
Well, and there's nobody who knows that better than our own Nicole Brassard, who sounds the horn on that front all the time. And Razor, no, you cannot make a job offer to Nicole. Just tell her.
I don't know.
Okay,
She's
hands
more
off. We're getting no, you won't. We're getting very near the end here, but I wanted to ask you, Perrin, on this note about supporting our own, because when we talk about procurement in a more sort of conventional type of way, when we're building bridges and roads and that sort of thing, we're in the fight with the Americans about Buy America, not sourcing outside of American borders. Buy Canada is sort of a thing as well. But can you, from a government perspective or a public policy perspective, put on those reins that say that the Canadian government, for instance, can only buy technology from technology suppliers in Canada? It would, is even part of that remotely possible to do?
Tom, just before I answer, let me check and make good. I was checking my thermostat on the wall, which is obscured by the banner behind me. So that if I look sheepish when Razor was talking there, I don't think what Razor was advocating was that we only buy Canadian, but more importantly, we tend to discriminate against Canadian. There's an odd peculiarity about the Canadian character that says until we get the validation somewhere else in the States, in Hollywood or some other place, we really think that we're second best. And I think a good start for us would be to say we're going to take away some of the impediments that we put in the way of Canadians with new technology. We'll take a flyer on them and use those technologies and use those purchases by government in Canada to validate the technologies so that when we're making sales abroad, we're better off. It is stunning to me the number of instances where business people say to me, I was over in Hong Kong trying to market my product, and they asked me, what are your sales at home on this? And the answer is nothing. We've got to change the mentality there and create greater support. That we can do. We can't shut others out, but we can stop shutting ourselves out.
Mm-hmm. And Nicole, that would, go ahead.
Sorry, I just want to expand on some policies we could take. I agree, it's not only by Canadian, but I do have this look in our own backyard first. Tie goes to the Canadian, but we could also change policy, and I'm going to give you a very specific example. There's a great Canadian startup called Savvy. Okay, it's digitizing mortgages and creating opportunities for home ownership for people that are not normally looked at. CIBC and their digital bank simply had the choice. They could have built the technology in-house, okay, or they could have partnered with a Canadian company, Savvy, who was actually founded by the company of the founder Sal that started Borrowell. So they had an existing relationship. They chose to partner with Sal and Savvy to build a digital mortgage product. But the incentive is in place through Shred for them to build it because they get 1/3 back. If you just change Shred to say, hey, whether you build it yourself or you buy from a Canadian tech company, we're going to make it be shreddable. We'll give you the same tax incentive. So now you're leveling the playing field, because right now there's a disadvantage from buying from the Canadian company versus building it yourself, which is still a made in Canada. But it's just little policy changes we could do to make so that we support more buying of our own Canadian technology and then exporting it to the world.
Right. And Nicole, literally 15 seconds left here, but it underlines the importance of having a continuing dialogue with government, right?
All day, all day. And I think not to just focus directly on government too, you also want to be engaging with the broader community. We call it PR for GR. So having a really good team of validators and stakeholders behind you, backing you up, so that when you go into those government meetings, they aren't cold. They know what you do. They know what your value prop, and you've got a bit of credibility behind you, because I think that's so important too when we're talking about Canadians maybe not trusting our own products. It's good to have 12 friends behind you saying, yeah, this is good to go, let's implement this.
Well, speaking of trust, one of the promises we make is that this webinar lasts exactly 1 hour, and we are now exactly at 1 hour. So, in the parlance of politicians, promises made, promises kept. We'll be wrapping this up. To my colleague Nicole in Vancouver, thank you very much. Razor, always good seeing you. And my old pal Perrin, thank you for partnering or letting us partner with you on this important conversation. It was great having you here, and I'll give you the final word.
Tom, it's a pleasure for us. Global is a great partner for us. You've done a superb job as moderator too. I think I would have liked to have heard your opinions more than giving my own. It's been a pleasure, Nicole and Razor. Thank you very, very much. Greatly appreciate both of you.
Okay. And with that, I will wrap it up. And I just wanted to thank everybody who participated by writing questions. I was reading them and putting it as part of the conversation. Please reach out to either Razor, to Nicole, or certainly to the Canadian Chamber with any further comments, thoughts, questions that you may have. We're not from the government, but we are here to help. So with that, I will wish everybody a very fine afternoon, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much.